Order in the court. Judge Benton's gavel slammed down, his voice thick with mockery. The young black woman stood motionless in her blazer, papers shaking in her hands. Miss Vaughn, the judge sneered, this isn't a debate club. Go home before you embarrass yourself further. But Arielle didn't flinch. She placed one document on the table and said, quietly but firmly, Your Honor, before you proceed, you might want to check who filed that motion you just denied. The courtroom went silent. Before we begin, please like, subscribe and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa, United States, Canada, UK, Australia, Jamaica. It all began 3 months earlier in Philadelphia, in a cramped apartment off Girard Avenue, where Arielle Vaughn lived with her mother, Monique. Monique was a nurse, kind, disciplined, and exhausted from 12-hour shifts at St. Mark's Medical Center. Arielle, at 19, was quiet, observant, and gifted in ways that made even her teachers uneasy. After graduating high school at 16, she'd quietly enrolled in an online pre-law program, completing coursework most adults struggled with. What her professors didn't know was that she was also studying law books late into the night, determined to understand how the system that crushed people like her mother actually worked. Monique had raised her alone since Arielle's father died when she was 7. He'd been a sanitation worker, strong and good-hearted, but an accident at work had left Monique battling debt and grief for years. She never complained, just kept working double shifts to keep their small world stable. Until the day she was fired. The official reason, violation of hospital protocol. The truth, she'd reported the death of a patient that the hospital tried to cover up, negligence that could cost millions in lawsuits. When Monique tried to fight back, the hospital's HR department stonewalled her. Her supervisor warned her, it's best to move on. People like us don't win against people like them. That night, Monique came home, shoulders shaking as she placed her badge on the table. They took everything, baby. Just like that. Arielle looked at her mother, the strongest woman she knew, and something inside her ignited. She stayed up until sunrise, scrolling through Pennsylvania labor laws, case studies, and federal whistleblower protections. What she found made her blood boil. The hospital had violated 3 major laws. By morning, she had already drafted a complaint. A week later, Monique sat across from her daughter at the kitchen table, stunned as she looked over the documents. Where did you learn to write like this? From the same laws they think we don't understand, Arielle said. If they won't give you justice, I will. Her mother smiled weakly. Baby, you can't represent me. You're 19. Arielle said nothing, but her eyes said everything. By the end of that week, the Philadelphia District Labor Court had received a detailed wrongful termination filing, signed Arielle Vaughn, pro se representative. When their case was approved for hearing, Arielle showed up in an old navy blazer from a thrift store, carrying a folder thicker than the defense's brief. Judge Harold Benton, known for his smug demeanor, peered over his glasses as she approached the bench. Miss Vaughn, he said, half laughing, this isn't high school. You can't play lawyer here. The courtroom chuckled. Even the hospital's attorney smirked. Arielle straightened her papers. I'm not playing, Your Honor. I'm here to argue the law. The judge's smile vanished. She began calmly listing the exact labor code violations: false dismissal, retaliation, and suppression of whistleblower evidence. Every point was backed by federal citations, case numbers, and timestamps. By the time she finished, the courtroom was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Judge Benton blinked. You memorized those statutes? Yes, sir, Arielle said. By heart. For the first time, he had no snide remark. Sometimes, justice doesn't wear a suit or a title. Sometimes it looks like a 19-year-old girl standing alone in a room full of people waiting for her to fail. Broken heart, if stories like this remind you why courage still matters, don't just watch. Subscribe. Because in a world that still doubts people like her, we need to keep these stories alive. Arielle's opening argument was sharp, precise, and fearless. Even the opposing counsel, Elliot Granger, the hospital's lawyer, began to glance nervously through his papers. But as the hearing ended, he smirked slightly and said, Enjoy your little victory, Miss Vaughn. It won't last. The next morning, the hospital submitted a motion to disqualify her as a representative, claiming she was impersonating an attorney. The judge agreed to review it immediately. By the time Arielle arrived at court the next day, security guards were already waiting at the door with a warning. Miss Vaughn, you might want to call a lawyer. You're being investigated for fraud. The next morning, the hallways of the Philadelphia District Labor Court buzzed with whispers. A rumor had spread. A teenager, pretending to be a lawyer, had filed a labor lawsuit against St. Mark's Medical Center. Arielle Vaughn walked through the doors anyway, holding her file tightly to her chest. Her heart pounded, but her eyes stayed fixed ahead. When she reached the courtroom, a bailiff stopped her. "Ma'am, the judge asked you to wait in the hallway until he calls you in." She nodded and sat on the hard wooden bench outside. People walked by, glancing at her, some amused, some skeptical. She could feel their judgment before a word was spoken. Inside, Judge Harold Benton and the hospital's attorney, Elliot Granger, discussed the new motion. Granger's tone oozed confidence. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "this young woman has committed a crime by presenting herself as legal counsel. She's a 19-year-old with no law degree, no bar certification, and no business representing anyone." Judge Benton sighed dramatically. "It's an insult to this courtroom. And frankly, to the law itself." The bailiff cracked open the door. "Miss Vaughn, the judge will see you now." When Arielle entered, all eyes followed her. Granger smirked. "Miss Vaughn, do you deny that you filed this complaint pretending to be an attorney?" Arielle stood straight. "I filed it as a pro-se representative, as Pennsylvania law allows. My mother signed the authorization. Everything I did is legal." The judge arched an eyebrow. "Legal? You're barely an adult." "I'm 19, Your Honor." The courtroom chuckled quietly. Granger adjusted his cufflinks, enjoying the moment. "Your Honor," he said mockingly, "I move that this case be dismissed with prejudice." Clearly, the plaintiff's representative lacks any formal legal education. Judge Benton nodded slowly, looking down at Arielle. "Miss Vaughn, do you have any formal qualifications in law?" The room fell silent. Everyone waited for her to stutter, to crumble under pressure. But Arielle only reached into her folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. "I expected this question," she said calmly. "So I brought the answer." She handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. He tore it open, eyes scanning the contents. Then his expression froze. The courtroom grew restless. Granger frowned. "What is that, Your Honor?" Benton cleared his throat. This is a certification of completion for the Pennsylvania bar examination. It's signed and verified by the state." The entire courtroom erupted in disbelief. "She passed the bar exam?" someone whispered. "That's impossible." "She's 19, another said. Benton looked up at her. "You expect me to believe you passed this test on your own?" "I don't expect you to believe me, Your Honor," she said. "I expect you to read the dates on the certificate." He did, and the shock deepened. 2 years ago?" he murmured. "You were 17? Arielle nodded. "I took it online under an academic waiver. My scores were verified and sealed until I reached legal age. I'm not impersonating an attorney, Your Honor. I just chose not to work for a firm that profits from injustice." Granger's jaw clenched. "This is absurd. Even if she passed, she can't represent someone in court without official admission." Arielle turned to face him. "And yet here we are, Mr. Granger. You've spent the past week responding to filings that you claimed a child couldn't write, but never once challenged on legal grounds. You didn't see my age, you saw my name and thought you could win by intimidation." A low murmur swept through the spectators. For the first time, the judge had no insult ready. But Granger wasn't finished. "Even if you pass the bar, Miss Vaughn, your motion relies on falsified evidence." Arielle blinked. "What evidence?" He pulled out a manila folder. "A witness deposition dated before your mother's termination notice. You submitted it, which means you either fabricated it or manipulated dates." The judge stiffened. "Is that true, Miss Vaughn?" Arielle looked at the paper, then at Granger. That deposition was obtained from the hospital's internal investigation log. If there's a date mismatch, it's because your client backdated the termination letter. The judge frowned. Do you have proof of that? Not yet, she said. But I will. Granger laughed. Bold claim for someone who can't even practice law. The judge slammed his gavel. Enough. I'll review the document personally. Until then, the court is adjourned. As everyone stood to leave, Granger leaned toward her and whispered, "You're clever. But clever isn't enough when you're playing in my arena." She didn't answer. She just gathered her papers and walked out. Outside, in the hallway, her mother was waiting. "What happened?" Monique asked, eyes full of worry. Arielle exhaled. "They tried to dismiss it. But I stopped them." Monique touched her daughter's cheek. "Baby, maybe this is too much. You're fighting a hospital, their lawyers, and now a judge who doesn't even respect you." Arielle smiled faintly. "I'm not doing this because they respect me. I'm doing it because you deserve justice." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Your father would be proud." That night, Arielle sat in her small room surrounded by law books and half-drunk coffee. She replayed the hearing in her head, every word, every sneer, every smirk. She wasn't angry anymore. She was focused. She opened her laptop, logged into a restricted legal database, and began digging into St. Mark's Hospital filings. Hours passed. Then she found it, a document labeled Patient Incident Review, Confidential. Inside were timestamps showing the hospital had created 2 versions of the termination letter, one before and one after the official date. Her hands trembled as she printed it. The next morning, she placed it in her folder, along with her mother's original termination notice. Some people fight for money. Others fight for fame. But sometimes, the bravest battles are fought by those who have nothing to gain, only something to prove. Broken heart, if stories like this remind you that truth still has a voice, don't just scroll. Subscribe. Because somewhere, another Arielle is standing in a courtroom, fighting to be heard. 2 days later, she returned to court with new evidence. The judge, still skeptical, allowed her to speak briefly before the next recess. Arielle took a deep breath and handed both documents to the bailiff. "Your Honor, I'd like these entered into evidence. They'll explain everything." Benton frowned. "And what exactly am I looking at?" She pointed calmly. 2 termination letters. One from the hospital's HR system, one from their private server. Identical signatures, different timestamps. Granger's eyes widened. "That's confidential material. She hacked our records." "No," Arielle said. "I subpoenaed them through a public access request. The hospital logged it by mistake." Gasps filled the room. Benton leaned forward. "Are you saying the hospital fabricated evidence?" Arielle nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. And I can prove who did it." Judge Benton stared at her. "Then prove it." Arielle's voice didn't shake. "I intend to." Because what she was about to uncover next wouldn't just expose a lie. It would shake the entire hospital system of Philadelphia to its core. The morning of the 3rd hearing broke gray and heavy over Philadelphia. Arielle stood in front of the courthouse doors, the folder pressed to her chest like armor. Inside were the documents she had spent 3 sleepless nights piecing together. Proof that the hospital hadn't just fired her mother unjustly, it had tampered with evidence to cover up its own negligence. Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. Reporters had started to take interest. The story of the teen girl lawyer had begun circulating through local news blogs. They wanted to see if she would break under pressure. Judge Benton entered, robe flowing, his expression unreadable. "Miss Vaughn," he said, "you've made serious claims about forged documents. You'd better be prepared to back them up." Arielle nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor. I have what you asked for." The bailiff took the folder from her hands and passed it to the judge. The rustle of paper was the only sound in the room. Benton scanned the first page, then the next, his eyes narrowing. "These are internal audit logs," he said slowly. "Where did you get them?" "They were released through a public information request," she answered. "The hospital's IT department accidentally uploaded an unredacted version to the state's healthcare database before rescinding it 12 hours later. I downloaded the file while it was still public. A low murmur swept through the crowd. Elliot Granger, the hospital's attorney, shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is a blatant invasion of privacy. It's evidence, Benton interrupted. Sit down, Mr. Granger. He turned back to Arielle. Explain these timestamps. She stepped forward. You'll notice that the document marked Termination Notice A was created on March 6 at 11:42 p.m. That's before the date the patient's death was reported. The second, Termination Notice B, was created 2 days later but backdated to match the first. That's forgery. And the metadata shows that both were created from the same administrative login belonging to Dr. Gregory Mason. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Dr. Mason, seated behind Granger, stiffened. Arielle continued, her voice steady. My mother was terminated because she reported a patient's death that could have been prevented. The hospital needed a scapegoat, so they created one. When she refused to stay quiet, they fired her. Granger's face flushed. Your Honor, we object to these wild accusations. Benton raised a hand. I'm not sure they're wild if the evidence holds. He flipped through another page. The signatures, the overlapping timestamps, everything lined up exactly as she claimed. Finally, he looked up. Dr. Mason, would you like to explain this? Mason stammered. It must be a clerical error. My staff handles those forms. Except the login data shows your initials and password hash, Arielle interrupted quietly. You approved both. The judge's gavel hit the block once, sharp. Enough. We'll recess while I confer with counsel. As the courtroom emptied, Granger leaned toward her, his voice low. You're making enemies, Miss Vaughn. Powerful ones. She met his stare without flinching. Good. That means I'm doing something right. In the hallway, Monique waited on a bench, her hands trembling. Baby, what's happening in there? Arielle sat beside her. They know now. He forged the documents himself. Monique exhaled, half in relief, half in disbelief. You really did it. Not yet, Arielle said. They'll fight back. They always do. She wasn't wrong. Within hours, Granger filed an emergency countersuit for defamation, claiming that Arielle had illegally obtained and misrepresented private data. The hospital's PR department released a statement calling her accusations the reckless fantasies of a misguided youth. By nightfall, strangers were commenting on social media, she's lying for attention. She's too young to know what she's talking about. Probably another activist trying to go viral. Arielle shut her laptop. For a moment, she let the weight of it all sink in. The ridicule, the loneliness, the fear that maybe she'd gone too far. Then she glanced at the photo of her mother taped above her desk, smiling in her scrubs, and whispered, They can call me whatever they want. They won't silence me. The next morning, when court reconvened, the room was packed. Even local TV cameras had been allowed inside. Judge Benton looked more cautious now, aware of the scrutiny. Miss Vaughn, he began, I understand new developments have surfaced. You may proceed. Arielle approached the bench with a new folder. Your Honor, this contains an internal email exchange between Dr. Mason and Mr. Granger, dated March 8th. The subject line reads, Containment Plan. In it, Dr. Mason instructs counsel to remove any mention of the patient from public reports and terminate the whistleblower immediately. The judge's eyebrows rose. How did you? The same database leak, she said. They tried to delete it, but the state's backup servers keep copies for 30 days. The courtroom exploded with noise. Cameras clicked. Reporters whispered furiously. For a moment, even Judge Benton seemed lost in the storm. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed. Dr. Mason, these are your words? Mason didn't answer. Granger cleared his throat. Your Honor, this has gone far enough. My client has rights. And your client, Benton interrupted, appears to have lied to this court. The judge stood. I'm ordering an immediate suspension of St. Mark's defense until these documents are verified by the Attorney General's office. Granger paled. You can't do that. I just did. That evening, Arielle and her mother walked out of the courthouse surrounded by reporters shouting questions. Miss Vaughn, how did you find this evidence? Do you think the judge owes you an apology? Are you really 19? Arielle said nothing. She just slipped her arm around her mother's shoulders and kept walking. But inside, her heart felt like it might burst, not from pride, but from the weight of everything still ahead. That night, as she reviewed her notes, her phone buzzed. A known number. She hesitated, then answered. A man's voice crackled through the line. You should have stopped while you were ahead, Miss Vaughn. Her breath caught. Who is this? Let's just say, the voice replied, calm and cold, there are people who don't appreciate you digging where you don't belong. The line went dead. For the first time since the case began, Arielle felt fear crawl down her spine. There are moments when doing the right thing costs more than anyone should have to pay. But heroes aren't born in comfort, they're forged in resistance. Broken heart, if you believe courage still has a place in this world, don't just watch. Subscribe. Because voices like Arielle's remind us that truth only survives when someone refuses to be quiet. The next morning, she arrived at court to find two men in dark suits standing by the door. One flashed a badge. Federal Bureau of Investigation, he said. We need to speak with Judge Benton before proceedings. 10 minutes later, the courtroom doors burst open. Agents surrounded Dr. Mason, reading him his rights. Gregory Mason, you're under arrest for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and fraud. Gasps filled the room. Granger tried to speak but was silenced by the judge's gavel. Benton turned to Arielle. Miss Vaughn, it appears your instincts were correct. Benton turned to Arielle. Miss Vaughn, it appears your instincts were correct. She stood there, stunned, as Mason was led out in handcuffs. The courtroom erupted in applause. As the crowd dispersed, Judge Benton leaned over the bench. Miss Vaughn, I'd like a word in chambers. She followed him, unsure what to expect. Behind closed doors, he said quietly, You've made history today. But remember, every victory has its price. He slid a sealed envelope across the table. Inside is something you'll need before this is over. Arielle opened it slowly and froze. It wasn't a document. It was a photo of her father, standing beside Dr. Mason. For a long moment, Arielle just stared at the photograph. The air in Judge Benton's chambers felt thick, almost suffocating. In the faded picture, her father stood in a white lab coat beside Dr. Gregory Mason. Both were smiling, their hands clasped over a clipboard. The image was dated 12 years ago, long before her father's fatal accident. Arielle's voice came out barely above a whisper. Where did you get this? Benton folded his hands. When I ordered Mason's arrest, I had the case files cross-referenced with older hospital records. Your father's name appeared in the same staff registry as Mason's. He worked maintenance at St. Mark's. It seems he and Mason knew each other well. That can't be right, she said, shaking her head. My father never mentioned anyone named Mason. The judge's tone softened. Sometimes people carry burdens they never talk about, Miss Vaughn. But there's more. When the FBI pulled Mason's financials, they found irregularities dating back to the same year your father died. Her stomach twisted. What kind of irregularities? Cash transfers, Benton replied. From the hospital's budget to off-site contractors. One of them was listed under your father's employee ID. Arielle felt dizzy. Are you saying they blamed him? The judge nodded slowly. The records suggest Mason covered up a fatal equipment malfunction 12 years ago and pinned it on a maintenance error. The fallout was buried after your father's death. The same negligence pattern your mother exposed may have started there. For a few seconds, Arielle couldn't breathe. It wasn't just about her mother anymore. It had never been. Mason had destroyed their family twice, once in the past, once in the present. She clutched the photo in her hand. He's going to pay for everything. Outside, the day had turned gray, rain streaking the courthouse windows. Reporters swarmed the steps, but Arielle barely noticed them as she left the building. Her mother waited in the car, relief in her eyes that quickly turned to worry when she saw her daughter's face. What happened? Arielle handed her the photo. You knew Dad worked at the hospital? Monique nodded slowly. He fixed equipment there before the accident. Why? He didn't just fix it, Arielle said. He was blamed for a machine failure Mason caused. That's why Mason knew exactly how to forge your paperwork. He'd done it before. Monique stared at the picture, tears forming. All these years I thought it was just bad luck. I never knew. Arielle leaned back, closing her eyes. He took everything from us once. He's not taking anything else. The following week, the courthouse was under lockdown as the investigation into St. Mark's expanded. More executives were subpoenaed, and Mason's attorneys scrambled to negotiate plea deals. But one afternoon, a plain white envelope appeared on Arielle's doorstep. No return address. Inside was a single note typed in bold letters. Drop the case, or history will repeat itself. She read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it beside her father's photograph. Fear crawled at the edge of her thoughts, but she refused to let it take root. The next day, she walked into the courthouse as if nothing had happened. The atmosphere inside was electric. The press benches overflowed, camera lights blinking. Everyone wanted to see what the 19-year-old girl would do next. Judge Benton addressed the court. Miss Vaughn, I understand there have been external pressures regarding this case. There have, Your Honor, she said, her voice steady. But intimidation doesn't change the truth. Granger, visibly rattled after his client's arrest, rose. Your Honor, my firm withdraws from this case effective immediately. Noted, Benton replied. The courtroom buzzed. Arielle caught sight of her mother in the back row, hands clasped tightly, hope flickering behind the exhaustion. When Benton gave her the floor, Arielle placed two items on the table, the forged termination letters and the photograph of her father. Your Honor, she began, I thought this was a wrongful termination case. It's not. It's the continuation of something that started 12 years ago, a cover-up that cost lives, including my father's. The judge's expression darkened. Explain. She drew a deep breath. When St. Mark's first hid evidence of negligence, Mason made sure there were no witnesses. The only person who could expose him back then was my father. After the equipment malfunction that killed a patient, the hospital wrote an internal memo blaming maintenance error. My father tried to correct it. A week later, he died in what they called an accident. The machine that killed the patient? The same model that malfunctioned again this year. A stunned silence filled the room. You're telling me, Benton said slowly, that Mason's fraud spans more than a decade? Yes, Your Honor. And the same department that covered it up 12 years ago falsified my mother's paperwork now. This wasn't just negligence, it was a pattern. The judge looked toward the prosecutors now representing the state. Do we have corroboration? One of them rose. The FBI's forensic report confirms it, Your Honor. 2 connected cases, same chain of evidence, same director approval. It's all there. Monique covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. Arielle's voice trembled, but she didn't stop. My father died trying to do the right thing. My mother lost her job for the same reason. And every single person in this room told us people like us couldn't win against people like them. The judge's gavel struck once. Enough. His voice carried across the room. Miss Vaughn, you've proven beyond any doubt that justice was denied to your family for years. St. Mark's Medical Center will be referred to the Attorney General for criminal prosecution. As for your mother, her termination is hereby declared unlawful. She is reinstated with full compensation and damages. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Monique covered her face, sobbing into her hands. Arielle closed her eyes, the weight of years lifting from her chest. But then Benton's voice cut through the noise, softer now. Miss Vaughn, before we adjourn, I have one question. What will you do next? She looked at her mother, then back at the judge. I think I'll keep fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. Reporters surrounded her again, microphones flashing. One shouted, Arielle, what would you say to those who doubted you? She paused just long enough to look into the cameras. I don't need to say anything. The truth already did. That night, back in their apartment, Arielle found her window open. The envelope she'd left on the table was gone. In its place was another photo. This time, it showed Dr. Mason being escorted away in handcuffs and a shadowy figure standing in the background watching. Scrawled across the bottom in black ink were 6 chilling words. He wasn't the only one involved. Arielle stared at it, the triumph fading from her chest. The fight, she realized, wasn't over. It was only beginning. Morning light poured through the thin curtains of their apartment, but Arielle hadn't slept. The second photo, the one left on her table overnight, sat beneath her fingertips like a quiet threat. She turned it over again and again, tracing the inked words. He wasn't the only one involved. The man in the shadows behind Dr. Mason's arrest, his face partially visible in the reflection of a police cruiser, wasn't a stranger. It was Judge Harold Benton. For a long time, she simply stared, letting disbelief slide into anger. It couldn't be true. The judge who had mocked her, doubted her, and then seemingly redeemed himself, was he part of it all along? Her mother entered the kitchen quietly. "You haven't moved all night." Arielle pushed the photo toward her. "Someone left this here." Monique frowned, studying it. "What does it mean?" "It means Mason wasn't acting alone," Arielle said, her voice steadying. "And I think I know who helped him keep the cover-up alive." Monique's brow creased. "Baby, please don't get involved anymore. You've done enough. You won." Arielle looked at her mother's tired eyes, the relief there, the hope, and felt a pang of guilt. She wanted to stop. She wanted to go back to being a 19-year-old girl who read law books in peace. But she couldn't, not while injustice still hid behind polished smiles and wooden benches. She kissed her mother's forehead. "I just need to see one more file." That afternoon, she returned to the courthouse under a gray Philadelphia sky. The reporters were gone now. The frenzy had faded. She slipped quietly through the security line, her folder pressed close to her chest. Down in the clerk's archives, she requested access to the sealed administrative log for Case 472B, State v. St. Mark's Medical Center, 2010. The clerk, an older woman, glanced over her glasses. "That's restricted, sweetheart. Only the presiding judge can authorize that." Arielle hesitated. And who was the presiding judge? The woman flipped through a worn ledger, her fingers stopping halfway down the page. Judge Harold Benton. A chill went through Arielle's body. "Thank you," she murmured, turning away before the woman could see her face. That night, Arielle sat alone with her laptop, searching through court archives, appeal dockets, and news clippings from 2010. Piece by piece, a pattern emerged. Judge Benton had presided over multiple hospital negligence cases. All dismissed. All linked to St. Mark's Medical Center. Her father's case, the one labeled an accident, had been the first. She felt her pulse in her ears as she scrolled through one last file. Judicial Review 2011, Honorable Harold Benton. The complaint had been dismissed quietly for lack of evidence. The signature at the bottom of the closure order, Dr. Gregory Mason. Arielle sat back in her chair, her breath catching. They had protected each other for over a decade. The next morning, she arrived at the courthouse early. Judge Benton was already in chambers, reviewing paperwork. When he saw her, his expression flickered. Surprise, maybe fear. "Miss Vaughn," he said, setting down his pen. "You shouldn't be here. The case is closed." She walked closer, holding the photo. "Is it? Because I think you and Dr. Mason closed a lot of cases that should have seen the light of day." His jaw tightened. "Be careful what you're suggesting." "I'm not suggesting," she said quietly. "I'm stating a fact. You were the presiding judge on the original St. Mark's negligence case. My father's case." He looked away, the silence stretching. "You don't understand how things worked back then." "I understand perfectly," Arielle said. "You let a man die to protect your reputation. And now you want me to walk away before people find out." Benton's eyes flashed. "You think this system will thank you for exposing me? You think it'll change anything?" "No," she said. "But maybe it'll stop someone else from suffering what my family did." He leaned back in his chair, defeated. "You're too young to be this angry." "I'm not angry," she said. "I'm awake." By evening, the story broke across every local news network. Judge Harold Benton accused of collusion and evidence suppression in decade-long St. Mark's cover-up. The FBI confirmed an internal investigation. Benton resigned quietly 2 days later. For the first time in her life, Arielle walked past the courthouse not as an outsider, but as someone who had changed what happened inside it. Weeks later, Monique's reinstatement became official. The hospital's board issued a public apology and offered a settlement, but Monique refused. Instead, she requested the creation of a patient safety scholarship in her late husband's name. The state agreed. At the ceremony, Arielle stood beside her mother, a framed photo of her father displayed beside the podium. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath and looked out at the crowd. My father believed that honesty mattered, even when no one noticed. My mother believed that kindness was strength. I just tried to live up to both. The audience rose to their feet, applause echoing through the hall. Later that night, sitting on their apartment balcony, Monique handed Arielle a letter that had arrived that morning. "It's for you," she said. "From the State Bar Association." Arielle opened it slowly. Inside was an official notice. Provisional license to practice law, Arielle Vaughn. Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm an attorney." Monique smiled through tears. "You always were, baby. You just didn't have the paper to prove it." They sat in silence for a while, watching the city lights flicker below. The world doesn't change because of power. It changes because of persistence, because someone refuses to accept silence as justice. Arielle didn't fight for recognition. She fought because truth mattered. Broken heart, if stories like this remind you that courage can come from anyone, anywhere, don't just scroll. Subscribe. Because every time you do, you help keep stories like hers alive. And maybe, somewhere, another 19-year-old will realize she doesn't need permission to stand for what's right. In the end, Arielle founded the Vaughn Legal Collective, a small organization that provided free legal aid to workers wrongfully terminated or silenced by large corporations. Her first case wasn't about winning, it was about rebuilding faith. As her story spread, others stepped forward: nurses, janitors, clerks, people who'd lost everything for telling the truth. Each time she walked into court, she thought of her father's photo and whispered the same words. "You didn't die in vain." And though the scars of the past never disappeared, they became proof of something stronger than pain. Proof that even in a system built on silence, one voice, steady and relentless, could still make the walls tremble.